on the appendicular skeleton. Give me just a second to get this set up here. We're going to share a screen. We are going to start this presentation. All right. All right, Thursday. Y'all are here, hopefully watching this video on Thursday, reviewing the bones of the appendicular skeleton. Maybe you're looking at this a little early. That would be great too. Right, so the appendicular skeleton, right, the bones of the limbs and their girdles, that is to say the arms and the legs and the bones that connect the arms and the legs to the trunk, right? So the pectoral girdle, right, the hip bones are connecting, the pectoral girdle, the clavicle and scapula are connecting the arm to the trunk, and then the pelvic girdle, the hip bones are connecting the lower limbs to the trunk there. So taking a look here. Just a few bones in the respective girdles, right? So the pectoral girdle is the clavicle and scapula. The only features you need to know are the sternal end and the acromial end. So the sternal end is touching the sternum, and the acromial end is touching the acromion process scapula. We'll take a look at that. And then, of course, the scapula, the shoulder blade itself. We will look at the humerus and features on the humerus, the radius and ulna, a few features on those, and then we need to be able to name all of the bones of the wrist, of which there are 8. All right, so we'll have some fun with that. And then metacarpals and phalanges. So 5 metacarpals per hand, and then 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 phalanges in each hand here, right? Same thing with the coxal bones. We're going to name the 3 bones that fuse together to form the os coxa, talk about some features there. The femur, patella, tibia, fibula, the tarsal bones, right? We have several of those again, and then metatarsals and phalanges. So again, 5 metatarsals and 14 phalanges on each foot. All right, so starting with the pectoral girdle, starting right here in the front, we have the bones in place, right? So the clavicle, the collarbone, right, connects the scapula here to the front of the chest, right? So this acromial or lateral end, you need to use the word acromial on your exams, right? So the acromial end here is attached to the acromion process of the scapula, which comes forward and covers the top of the head of the humerus there, right? And the sternal end, of course, connects to the sternum. So that's pretty easy right there, all right? So we're going to move to a posterior view of the shoulder girdle. So we're just looking at the scapula. This is the posterior view. So this is how it's going to look over here on the right as you're looking at somebody's back, right? We have this spine of the scapula, sort of like a mountain range coming out of this flat plane right there. And then that becomes the acromion process as it moves forward to attach to the clavicle. That is called the acromioclavicular joint, or the AC joint for short. Common injury in different athletes, throwing athletes. And then we have another process that comes forward off of the major portion here, not just the spine, but this body of the scapula called the coracoid process here, right? And this is an attachment site for a muscle, all right? On the anterior aspect, this is the side that rests against the rib cage, right? We have a little muscle that goes under here to help control the scapula. And then this indentation here is called the glenoid cavity or the glenoid fossa. It's a very shallow socket for the ball and socket joint of the shoulder, deepened a little bit by some cartilage that rings it, right? But it is the most vulnerable joint in the body to injury because this ball and socket is so shallow, it's very easy to injure. But we trade off, we get a lot of flexibility here. Right, so that's the shoulder girdle, 2 bones there. Now the upper limb itself, there are 30 bones in each, right? So by the time you learn one, you know 60 of the 206 bones we're going to cover in this unit. From the 80, I think we already covered in the axial skeleton. So the arm itself has the humerus in the middle of it. It's not funny, it's humerus. The forearm has 2 bones, the antebrachial region, remember, the radius and the ulna. And then we have 8 carpal bones in the wrist. Carpal refers to the wrist. Metacarpal refers to the bones in the palm of the hand. And then the phalanges or digits are the bones of the fingers themselves. So starting off with the humerus, we are going to see here. Let me double check and make sure that I'm actually recording. Yes, we are actually recording. That's good news. All right, the humerus, right? So look, viewed from the front in anatomical position, we can see the articular surface of the humerus here, right? The part that is actually part of the joint covered in hyaline cartilage. Also here in the posterior view, this is the head of the humerus, right? We have an anatomical neck or narrowing of the humerus right here along this line, right there. So it's the anatomical neck or narrowing. But if you go in for a surgical replacement, right, they're not going to cut right there. They're going to cut the whole head of the humerus off right here and then pound a titanium replacement prosthetic in here, right, and then reattach everything here. Now from the front, the greater tubercle, right, remember a tubercle and tuberosity are large rough bumps. Typically they are attachment sites for tendons and ligaments. And then we have the lesser tubercle here. The biceps tendon, the long head of the biceps, travels through that intertubercular groove right there. We have another little deltoid tuberosity right there. So triangle for deltoid tuberosity there. And that is the insertion of your deltoid muscle, that shoulder cap. And then we have the long shaft through here. On the front, we can see the articular surface for the radius, right? Articulates with the capitulum, and it glides up and over this little ball right here on the lateral side as the elbow hinges. The actual hinge joint here is the ulna articulating with this bow tie shaped trochlea, right? So this is a cylindrical thing that narrows in the middle, and the ulna fits over here, right, and then opens and closes, and this is the hinge joint of the elbow right here. Now, the condyles are going to be these articular surface. The epicondyle, or beyond the condyle, right, are these protrusions out to either side. So the medial epicondyle first, right, the lateral epicondyle here. These can serve as attachment sites for other muscles. If you just heard that fall, I have a kitten that is knocking stuff off of the hutch of my desk because she is spoiled and wants attention, right? Now this thumbprint, this shallow indentation right here at the back of the elbow, at the distal end, right? As we're moving further away from the attachment site at the trunk. So that would be distal. And again, I'm really bad at writing with a mouse. Is going to be the olecranon fossa. Why olecranon? Well, because the structure that glides in and fits into this little indentation is the olecranon process of the ulna. We'll go ahead and take a look at that here, right? So viewed from the front, right, the ulna is the medial bone here. We can see we have this articular surface here that is shaped to fit that trochlear notch, right? So in 3 dimensions, this indentation here is looking like a bow tie as well. This portion, right, this olecranon here is what will insert into that olecranon fossa when the elbow is fully extended as in anatomical position. As we look at the ulna, the distal end of the ulna, right? Again, distal end down toward the bottom of the screen here. We have another styloid process. Remember, we had a styloid process of the temporal bone, right? We also have a styloid process of the ulna, right? And then there's another styloid process of the radius. These are used essentially as motion limiters for the carpal bones. They provide a hard bony stop as we move our wrist from side to side. We have an let's see, what would we call this? An interosseous membrane here connecting these two bones together, functioning like ligaments, right? Binding these two bones together. And then we have the head of the radius. Now, the radius and ulna, the radio-ulnar joint, more specifically the proximal radio-ulnar joint, I'm just going to abbreviate that here, right? This is a pivot joint. So this tire, this circular head of the radius, spins in this little notch here on the side, right, of the ulna. This is the radial notch, and it spins around, and this is what allows us to turn our hand over at the elbow, right? Fold our forearm over to put our palm face down, if you will. So practically speaking on exams, right, I need you to differentiate which styloid process you're talking about. You can just put ulnar styloid process, radial styloid process, or if we're looking at a bone of the skull, right, styloid process of the temporal bone or the temporal styloid process. Be specific, be specific. Right, zooming in again at the elbow, this is all three bones as they would articulate. And so again, we can see the head of the radius has a shallow indentation that glides on the top of the capitulum here. The hinge joint is formed between the trochlea and the trochlear notch, right? And then the elbow will slide over this joint surface as it opens and closes. And this is the view from the back, and we can see the olecranon process here fitting within the olecranon fossa. So when you extend your arm out as far as it will go, right, this provides, again, a hard stop for that motion. Now we can hyperextend if we stretch the ligaments and joint capsule here, right? But full extension is when we meet a stop right there, right? Now, the wrist bones. The wrist and ankle bones are the source of the most confusion in the appendicular skeleton, right? The carpus, or the wrist, consists of 8 bones. There's 2 rows of 4, right? In the proximal row, lateral to medial, we have the scaphoid first, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. And then in the distal row, closer to the fingers, we have the trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate, right? So in the first row, only the first 3 are forming that wrist joint with the bones, the radius, and the ulna, right? The pisiform is sort of sitting in front of the wrist, not participating, not articulating there. So we have a mnemonic device. And I'm going to keep my ink annotations, and I'll move this over here just for full transparency. Oh, this is a picture. Oh no. So this is, let me just do this by hand then. Pneumo is for breath, not for memory. It's a mnemonic device, silent M-N-E-M-O-N-I-C, all right, mnemonic there. Sally left the party to take Kathy home. Now, I find mnemonic devices very effective, right? Very effective. But I also find that the funnier they are, the more memorable they are, right? My anatomy professor taught me one that is just enough to make you blush, and I've remembered it for 20 years. So some lovers try positions that they can't handle. All right. So again, the first four are the proximal row, lateral to medial, and then the next four are going to be the distal row, right? Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. Some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Trapezium under the thumb, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. We'll take a look at what that looks like again, and we'll say it all over again. Now, the metacarpus, or the palm, consists of 5 long bones, the metacarpals, numbered 1 through 5, starting at the thumb. The phalanges are also numbered 1 through 5, starting at the thumb. So your little pinky is number 5. The thumb is also called the pollex. And I believe that's also misspelled. That should be UX, unless I am very much mistaken. I'm going to take the time to look that up real quick, because it's possible that I am just not remembering correctly. Nope, it's correct. I am remembering incorrectly. All right, so the pollex. Now, there are 2 phalanges in the thumb and 3 phalanges in the other fingers. So we have a proximal and a distal phalanx in the thumb, and a proximal, distal, and middle phalanx in the fingies, right? 1 through 4. Excuse me. Moving on. All right. So let's take a look at the phalanges first. Get those out of the way. So on the thumb, anterior view of the right hand, so palm forward, thumb will be on the right hand side here. We have a proximal and distal phalanx. Do it in yellow this time, right? Proximal in yellow. All right, we'll circle those. The middle phalanx, let's take light blue, right? There is no middle phalanx in the thumb, so we're going to skip that. And then the distal phalanx, maybe orange, right? That'll work. Distal phalanx. All right, there we go. So if we add those up, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14 phalanges in each hand. Now the thumb, again, see, do I have a green? I have a green. The metacarpals, these are going to be the bones of the palm. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ending at the little pinky there. Too easy, too easy. Now, back to the carpals. Let me erase some of this here, because it's going to get in the way. Get out of here. Get out of here. All right. Now the carpals, we have 2 rows, proximal and distal. Remember, the proximal row is closer to the attachment site on the trunk there, right? So proximal row, distal row, right? Now remember, this is the right hand, so this is going to be lateral side, and then the medial side toward the body here. And when we use our mnemonic device, we are going to go from lateral to medial, proximal to distal, right? So some lovers try positions that they can't handle, right? Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. Trapezium is under the thumb, trapezoid, capitate, and then hamate. Notice the hamate is underneath digits 4 and 5. Capitate is under 3, trapezoid is under 2, trapezium is under 1, right? You're going to see a similar arrangement in the feet. Now, pisiform, it may be a little bit hard to tell, is attached to the triquetrum here, participating in the wrist joint. So the wrist joint is going to be under here, right? But the pisiform is sitting anterior to the triquetrum and is not articulating with the ulna or the radius there. If we view it from the back of the hand, how in the world am I going to tell this is the back of the hand? Two big clues, right? One, the pisiform will not be visible because it is in front of the triquetrum, right? There's no pisiform. We're looking at the back of the hand. Second, you see these two little nubbins right here, right? Those are indicative of little sesamoid bones within the tendon of the thumb, right? And we're going to see that only on the front hand side, right? With enough experience, you'll recognize it without consciously thinking about that, right? But you need to look at this a lot. You need to handle a lot of bones, right? So we can do the same thing. It's still lateral to medial, right? But if we're looking at the back of the hand, remember you have to move it into anatomical position. So you're looking at this from behind, right? And so it's going to look a little bit different, right? In this picture, we've essentially just folded the hand palm down, right? So some lovers try positions. We're whispering positions because the P is invisible. The trapezium under the thumb, that they can't handle, right? Scaphoid lunate triquetrum, pisiform is up here, and then trapezium under the thumb, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Similarly, 1 through 5 works the same way. Number 1 is still the thumb, even if you're looking at it from the back. And these are still proximal and distal, proximal, middle, and distal phalanges, right? Thinking back to our bone classification, the metacarpals, 1 through 5, and all of the phalanges are classified as long bones. The carpals are classified as short bones. The radius and ulna are also classified as long bones. So congratulations, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus 14 is 19 plus 8 carpals is 27, right? 28, 29 plus the humerus is 30 plus the clavicle and scapula is 32 bones of the upper limb. Multiply that by 2 because once you know the right, you know the left. 64 whole bones right there, right? Too easy. Too easy. Taking a big chunk out of that 206, right? Now, the pelvic girdle attaches the lower limb, right? And this is made up of the os coxae, or the coxal bones, right? Here we go. Now, the sacrum is part of the axial skeleton, right? But the coxal bones are part of the appendicular skeleton. We're going to look at them both together because they work together, right? The hip joint is a ball and socket joint like that of the shoulder, but it is much more stable because the socket is much deeper and the ball sits down deeper into it, right? Not quite as mobile as the shoulder joint, but a lot more stable, a lot more resistant to injury. The 3 bones that form the coxal bone are the ilium, which is the great big wing on top, the ischium, which is the part you sit on, and the pubis is that hard, bony stop above your external genitalia in the front, right? The pelvis itself is formed by the sacrum coccyx and the coxal bones here. So contributions from the appendicular and the axial skeleton. So the ilium, right? This great big wing here, right? Called the ala, or the wing of the ilium, right? We have the iliac crest here, or the top of the ilium. All right. The pubis swings down around to the front, and we have the pubic joint here, right here, with a fibrocartilaginous disc at the pubic symphysis, right, which is where they join together. And then toward the back from here, this bone runs around and is the back and is the attachment for your hamstring muscles, right? This is what you sit on. Those are your sit bones in the back. And we can see the socket for the femoral head right here. This is the acetabulum. Viewed from the side, right, again, we can see the iliac crest up here on top, this rough texture up top here above this line, right? All of this is going to be the wing of the ilium, this large structure. Then we have the greater sciatic notch, right? This big 7, right here, if you will. And then this little 7 down here, that would be the lesser sciatic notch. Now this acetabulum, this is covered in hyaline cartilage. There's a great big ligament and an artery that comes out here directly into the head of the femur. But this is sort of like 4 points where the 4 corners of those states come together, right? We have 3 corners of these different bones here fusing together to form this acetabulum, right? This joint is properly called the femoroacetabular joint, or the hip joint. And here, this side view gives us a much better view of the ischium in the back, right? And the shape of it as viewed from the side, and the pubis here. This roughened portion of the ischium, the ischial tuberosity, that is the attachment site for your hamstrings muscles. So it's nice and rough there. And then we have the obturator foramen, named for some nerves that pass through here. All right, sharing a name with some nerves that pass through there. Now, the pelvis differs between males and females, right? Obviously, females need to pass a baby's head through the pelvis in the birth canal so the species can reproduce. And so the female pelvis is specialized for that function. A little bit more tilted forward, right? We're going to have the cavity of the pelvis is going to be broader, right? A little shallower here, right? More volume within the pelvis here. The bones tend to be lighter, thinner, and smoother than the males. The acetabula, the sockets here for the hips, they are a little bit smaller to reflect the overall smaller bone size in females, and they are further apart, right? So if we were to draw a femur in here, this is going to have an effect, right, of making the femurs hang a little bit down toward the middle because the hips are wider, whereas in the male pelvis, the hips are a little bit narrower, right? So the femur is going to hang a bit more straight down, right? And this has biomechanical implications for your patients who are performing in sports. The pubic angle or pubic arch is this region right under here. And the angle formed here, right, is going to be 80 to 100 degrees or so. I think the textbook says 80 to 90 degrees, right? But there's more rounded going on here. In the male pelvis, this pubic arch, that was a terrible job drawing, I will admit. But it is much narrower and sharper, right? So 50 to 60 degree angle. The entire pelvis, the ilium are more upright and faced more forward rather than being spread open to the front as in the female pelvis here. The overall volume of this pelvic opening is much smaller. The pelvic opening is narrower. The pelvis is going to be tilted less far forward, so more neutral pelvis, and the bones are going to be heavier and thicker, and reflecting the larger muscular attachments, the markings are going to be also larger and more prominent. So for purposes of quizzes and exams, you will likely need to list 2 differences between the male and female pelvis, right? I need you to be specific. Write the answer on the back and be thorough, right? Use complete sentences when you're describing the difference between the female pelvis. 1 or 2 word answers are often vague and incomplete, right? Some other visual differences we can see here as we look at the sacrum and coccyx, the female pelvis, we can see the sacrum and coccyx. We still have this posterior convexity or kyphosis happening down here, but the whole thing is angled outward, right? Whereas in the male pelvis, everything is tucked in a little tighter. Again, the baby's head has to pass through this region here, and that structure reflects that, right? We have a lot of space here reflecting a very large area, right, within there, and a much narrower, smaller area in here, right? Now the sciatic notch, the greater sciatic notch, typically very wide, a little more shallow here. Here's the lesser sciatic notch again, and the greater sciatic notch in the male tends to be a little narrower, a little deeper, although I will admit in this particular example, the difference is not all that significant. Viewed from the bottom, right, again, the pelvic inlet, a nice wide oval here, on the brim and the outlet. The ischial tuberosities are further apart, right? So we can see the difference there, the inlet and the outlet. Everything is wider, everything is more space. Where in the male, the outlet is narrower, right? The inlet, the pelvic inlet viewed from the top is essentially heart-shaped, right? We see heart around the outlet superior there. So, right, so be able to be specific and name two major differences. So just putting the wood wider, if you just say wider and narrower, right? Well, what is wider? The acetabula are farther apart in the female and closer together in the male. That is one difference, right? You're expressing that difference in two ways, but that's one difference, right? And that's fine. Be thorough, right? But don't just say wider and narrow. What's wider? The pelvic inlet is wider in the female, narrower in the male. The pelvic outlet is wider in the female, narrower in the male, right? Be specific, right? Typically, I would say, think about bone thickness, right? In the female, bones are lighter, thinner, and smoother. In the male, they're heavier and thicker. The acetabula are smaller and further apart in the female than they are in the male. That's one difference. The pubic arch, the pubic angle is broader and more rounded in the female than it is in the male, right? That would be three differences listed there. Be specific, be verbose, be loquacious, right? Now, moving down from the pelvic girdle into the lower limb proper, we have the femur, right? Largest bone in the body. Just like the humerus, this rounded, smooth surface up here would be covered in cartilage and is the head. This narrowing here is going to be the neck. And then we move into muscular attachment sites. So as you move down the side of your thigh, if you can probably feel a bony protuberance straight out to the side. That is going to be your greater trochanter. Yes, it's trochanter as in K, right? Not trochanter, right? This greater trochanter here, right, sticks out pretty much straight to the side and is an attachment site for some large hip muscles here. So viewed from the front like this, viewed from the back, it's going to look like this. And the lesser trochanter comes off the back medial side, right? So posterior and medial here, right? And it is also a site for muscular attachment. Now, as we move distally, we can move downward, and distally on this picture, we have an articular surface on the front, right? This is for the patella, the articular surface of the patella or the kneecap. And so we can take a look at the kneecap. It's a bone embedded within the quadriceps tendon, right? And the back of it is nice and smooth and covered with cartilage to glide nice and easily over that patellar surface, right? And the knee joint proper happens down here at the medial and lateral condyles here, at this articular surface here, right? Large rounded knuckles of bone covered in hyaline cartilage, right? And again, forms a modified hinge joint right, at the knee as it sits on top of the tibia. In between the two condyles, we have this intercondylar fossa, and we have some ligaments attaching there. So a large, shallow depression right there. Just like in the humerus, we have some epicondyles out to the side. So on the medial side, we have the medial epicondyle, and on the lateral side, we have the lateral epicondyle beyond the condyle. Again, moving distally, we're going to see the bones of the lower leg, the tibia and the fibula, right? We have condyles again, the articular surfaces up here on top, right? And so this whole rounded part is going to be considered the condyle here. That large bump that we talked about, right, for muscular attachment point in our last meeting, the tibial tuberosity is the attachment site for the quadriceps tendon or patellar ligament, depending on how you want to name that, right? Large and bumpy to reflect the power and tension that is applied to the bone at this location. And we can move distally down, and we see some similarities between the arms and the leg, right? Where we have a styloid process in the radius and ulna, we have a similar structure that's just a little bit broader, right? These are the bumps on either side of your ankle, the medial and lateral malleolus. All right. The fibula is on the lateral side of the leg, so lateral over here, medial over here on this side in this diagram. So we have our head of the fibula proximally, and then the lateral malleolus distally with a long shaft and another interosseous membrane here acting as a ligament holding these bones together so that they don't separate. All right. Now moving down into the foot and ankle. The tarsals are the ankle bones. These are classified as short bones. The coxal bones, again, are irregular bones. The sacrum and coccyx are irregular bones. And the metatarsals and phalanges, again, just like the metacarpals and phalanges of the hand, are all long bones, even though they're real little, right? Real little, but they're still shaped like long bones. All right. Now, moving from superior to inferior, and then forward, right? Medial to lateral, we're going to use another mnemonic device. Tiger, cubs, need milk, but with a C. And my writing here reflects the age of child that would write milk with a C, right? So just underneath the tibia, we have the talus here. This forms the hinge joint at the ankle that allows us to flop our toes up and down, right? That articular surface here is very smooth, right? So tiger, T for tiger, Tony the tiger, great. Cubs for calcaneus. This is your heel bone. It's the largest tarsal bone. If you pick it up and hold it in lab next time we meet, you'll see that it feels a little bit like a pistol grip. And you can actually tell which side it's from based on which hand it fits in better. Moving forward, the keystone of the arch of the foot, the navicular bone, need. And then moving forward again, we have the medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiform bones, MIL, right? M-I, missed L. And then finally the cuboid, right, which anchors the lateral part of the foot under digits 4 and 5 is our C in milk, right? So tiger, cubs, need milk. There we go. All right. So that represents your 7 tarsal bones, right? Notice there's one less tarsal than there are carpals, right? But we have the same number of bones in each leg as we do in each arm. How do we figure that, right? Because we have a kneecap adding an additional bone there, right? That patella It represents something that's not present in the arm. So the metatarsals work just like the metacarpals, 1 through 5, starting at the big toe, right, or the hallux, and ending at the pinky inky. And here, the phalanges work the same way. The big toe only has a proximal and a distal, right? Whereas all of the other phalanges have a proximal, middle, and distal phalange or phalanx. So if I point an arrow right here, name this bone, be specific, right? I'm going to write middle phalanx. We'll pretend I spelled that right. And then what digit is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Middle phalanx 4. If I point here, this is distal phalanx 1. If I point here, that's metatarsal 3, right? So on and so forth. All right. If you have any questions, please send them to me on Blackboard. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Have a good day.